Thank you. So, warm welcome to everyone that's joined us today. My name is Michael McAllister, one of the founding members of the Payroll Bureau Association, the PBA, and I'm joined today with my colleagues Tracy, Haig and Linda, who are working hard behind the scenes today to make today a success. Hopefully the topic attracted everyone. Furlough has been something that's been really, I think, very stressful for us all and been a huge challenge so far, and I don't actually think any of us have even lodged a claim yet, so that's testing enough. We are thrilled to be joined today by Kate Upcraft, a technical writer and owner of Kate Upcraft Consultancy Limited. And for those who don't know Kate launched her company in 2005 and was formerly the payroll legislation manager at Marks and Spencer's, and did join us from the dark side as she joined us from the HR side. But as I say, we don't judge her for that. She's now a full 100% payroll person and has been helping us all, I think, through these difficult times. I think we all have had a late night WhatsApp to Kate in panic, or an email without actually saying, hello, how are you? With asking her just to say, can you agree these calculations, or do you think I'm going mad? So I'm sure she'll agree on that. But just for some general housekeeping, we'll take some questions at the end. If you do have a burning question, please do use the raise hand, but if you can, ideally keep that until the end. And what we'll do is we'll take the slides off screen and we'll allow you to unmute yourself and you can ask questions directly. Or if you would rather, you can email the team directly using the Payroll Bureau Association email address, or visit us on our LinkedIn page. So without anything further, I will now pass you over to Kate Upcraft.
Hello everybody, and thank you very much to the team behind the PBA for inviting me to talk to you this morning about this very interesting second scheme that we're going into. We thought scheme 1 was complicated enough, and here we find ourselves now embroiled in scheme 2, which is a whole different level. I've only got a few minutes with you this morning, so I'm not going to say any more, and I'm going to go dive straight in. I'm going to be asking Haig to move the slides on, which he's very kindly done for the first one. So let's just remind ourselves where we were up until the end of scheme 1, which ended last week. And we should be very clear, these are totally different schemes. So under scheme 1, which ran until the 30th of June, you couldn't work at all. You had to do a 21-day minimum furlough. And in order to join scheme 2, an employee has to have had one 21-day minimum furlough in that period. So if you hadn't had one before, you had to have been put onto furlough from the 10th of June to have completed that 21 days by the end of June. Once you have had a 21-day, though, perhaps in April or May, and we're back at work in June, it's quite acceptable for you to be furloughed after the 10th of June. But if you want to claim for that final period, then you will have to observe 21 days as a minimum furlough period before moving into flexibility of scheme 2. So an example I've put on the slides, if somebody who had been furloughed in April or May was furloughed again in June, and you want to claim for that person, that would have to be, in the example, the 22nd June to the 12th of July, and then they could go into flexibility from the 13th, which means that you've got 2 claims there. You've got a claim under scheme 1 to the end of June, and then you've got a claim under scheme 2 to the 12th of July, or later, of course, if the person then carries on throughout July to do some work. And you want to do the claims in the right order, because the highest number of people you've claimed for under scheme 1 is going to frank the highest number of people you can claim for under scheme 2. So scheme 1 claims have to be complete by the 31st of July. So it's still okay that if you've not made a claim at all, you could claim from the beginning of March to the end of June, but you must do that by the end of this month, and you need to do that first before you make a claim under scheme 2. Otherwise you won't exist as an employer under scheme 1, which won't then allow you to make a claim under scheme 2. Okay, so next slide please. So scheme 2 then, we've said no new employers, but the flexibility element is no minimum furlough. So you can be working and furloughed on the same day if you want to, because it's down to as granular as a number of hours that you wish to. The important thing, though, is about this thing called the high water mark in the legislation, which says that whichever was the highest number of employees that you claim for under Scheme 1 at any point, that's going to be the highest number that you can claim for from July onwards. Now, that said, there are 4 categories of people that you can make an adjustment for. Now, this is quite complicated. This is useful because there will be 4 categories of people who you wouldn't have necessarily claimed for yourself under Scheme 1, but legitimately now might want to furlough or part furlough. So these are people coming back into the workplace or onto the payroll from family-related leave, maternity, adoption, etc. People who were stupid into you, so they could have been on somebody else's claim, they might not have been, but they didn't even work for you. People who were in somebody else's PAYE scheme, so you've had a scheme restructure and they're now part of yours, or people who were they were suspended from your perspective, being paid by the MOD, and now they've come back as demobilised reservists. So all of those 4 categories means that your numbers can be increased from where they were from March to June. But to do that, you need to make a phone call to ask for your high watermark to be reset to the numbers that you need. Now, if you did that for July and say you went from 60 people to 62 people because you've got 2 people coming back from maternity leave, then 62 becomes your high watermark for August onwards. If you've then got 2 more people coming back from maternity leave in September, so you've now got 64, you're going to have to ring again to get your numbers put up to 64. But if you remain at 62, the validation will now be that your high watermark has been set at 62. So it might just be 1 phone call, it might be several phone calls for those of you with large payrolls where people are going to keep coming back between July or coming back into your payroll structure between July and the end of October. But the group that you can't adjust for are the sick leave returners, because of course there was a choice with people. If they were on SSP rather than being furloughed, which would have been a bit odd because obviously we wouldn't have had much money, they coming back, I'm afraid, aren't going to be an addition case. But if you'd furloughed them in preference to them being on SSP, so they've been in a claim before, then you don't need to adjust for them because clearly they were already in one of your claims. Okay, so the next slide, please, Haig. So we've got 3 types of furlough from July onwards, but the legislation calls them all the same thing, flexible furlough, but they are different in your world. You'll have some people who are fully furloughed still, they can't come back to work, and there is no minimum period for that now, so that's the big change. If you live in Leicestershire like I do, there are lots of businesses where you're still fully furloughed because we're back in lockdown again. You could be on flexi furlough where you've got some work and some furlough, and then you've got people whose furlough is coming to an end. So it's the last claim period and then they're going back to their normal hours, whatever normal looks like for the future for them. You need to agree those changes in writing, and they are new agreements from the 1st of July. Even though the employee isn't required to come back to you, you've got to have written to them, and you must keep that agreement for 5 years. At the end of the arrangement, when they're either coming back to work, changing their terms and conditions, or having their employment terminated, that's another formal employment law requirement to make that decision as to what is going to happen to them to the future and bring them off that employment status, which was furloughing. Okay, next slide, thank you. The biggest change in what we're doing now in order to facilitate flexible furloughing is the concept of hours that we've got to do. Now, the tricky thing in the guidance is not only calculating the hours, but also what you do once you've done the calculation. So if you're claiming for a whole pay period and somebody is monthly paid, so you're paid for the whole of July and you're claiming for the whole of July, whatever usual hours you calculate, and we'll have a look at how we do that, you round them up to the next highest number, and we don't follow normal rounding rules. So as soon as you go over into a decimal point, you round up to the next whole hour, and that can be really important because if you've got a lot of people, the higher the usual hours, the better it will be for you. But once you've got a claim that covers more than one or only part of a pay period, then each of those parts of the week or month, or if you've got more than one weekly pay period, you have to work the usual hours out separately And then you use normal rounding rules for each of those separate constituent parts. So rounding down if it's 0.5 or lower, or rounding up. So those rounding rules are strange and you need to get your head around them. Thank you, Haig. If we can have the next one. So if we were looking at somebody who's got a claim for the whole of July and they're monthly paid and salaried on a 37.5-hour week, you do this calculation of usual hours over calendar days. So just like we had in Scheme 1, we're not thinking about what we do in the payroll. This is entirely a different standalone calculation. And we basically look at the elapsed time in the claim, not the working pattern at all. So we divide their normal week by 7, multiply it by 31, because that's the number of days in July. That tips just over 166, so it gets rounded up to 167 usual hours for the month of July. And you do that for each month. That's different lengths, obviously, because September is going to be a different length of month. But when you've got somebody that's claiming from, say, the 1st to the 10th of July, that's 2 weekly pay periods if you're weekly paid. Then you get a different answer. And this is changed in the guidance from the 12th of June, when the guidance was amended last Wednesday, the first day of Scheme 2, to say something completely different. Because now it says if you've got more than one pay period in the claim, each one stands alone. So that 10-day period is only 5 out of 7 days of the 2 weeks that it relates to for a weekly paid person. So we end up now, that calculation comes to 26.43 hours for this person. So it rounds down to 26. So we add the 2 weeks together and you get 52. In the guidance before, 26.43 rounded up like it did in the salaried calculation. So you got 54 usual hours. So be aware that's changed. Of course, it would be much easier if we could do claims across the whole of the calendar month. But some of your clients won't have the cash flow to be able to wait till the end of the month for the claim, and they're going to be embroiled in doing much more frequent claims. So it's all about money versus the administrative burden, and the fact that if you can incorporate weeklies and monthlies within a monthly claim period, which is not easy, then you can go for the always rounding up option, which will be better. Thank you, Haig. So a few more things about hours. If it's a shift pattern, you consider the length of the shift pattern. So if somebody's on a 4 on 4 off, that's considered an 8-day shift pattern. And if they're on 12 hours for 4 of those days, again, you multiply it up to come up with an amount per month, which would be for the month of July. So that's worth thinking about. Weeks when salaried folk are on furloughed are ignored if they have at that point were on holiday, sick, anything else that was going on in February, which is your base month for the salaried person's hours. So they're classed as their ordinary furloughed hours in that particular point in time. But their holiday pay, and this is exactly where we've been in Scheme 1, if people are going on holiday, and more people will be, that's absolutely fine. But of course, the holiday has got to be paid at 100%, even though it's ignored and it's treated as furlough hours, which is kind of difficult, but that's what we've been with Scheme 1. And we want it to be that way because we want to be able to have people on holiday that we're funding, even though we've got to top up. We've got a very different situation though with people who are variably paid, and you'll know in the legislation there's a difference. Fixed rate people are salaried people, variable pay people are the 0 hours, the part-timers, the casuals. For them, we have to look back, and when we do the calculation of their hours over 1920, any time that they were on family related leave, we knock their hours out of the calculation so it doesn't reduce their average, but we don't touch their pay. Now, I have a problem with this change in the guidance, which again only appeared last Wednesday, because I don't think it's, I think the revenue are forgetting that variable pay people are not just 0 hours, and that you've got variably paid people who've got permanent contracted part-time hours. And I just think this is going to be very confusing for people. So go and have a read of the guidance about what to do for people on family-related leave as to what your calculation of their hours are. Lots of people have been asking about single directors and how on earth are we supposed to work out what their hours are because they haven't got contracts. We thought we'd have a real issue with this originally, because we thought, oh gosh, they're going to try and exclude directors because they'll say this is unmeasured work. And although that's terminology from national minimum wage and directors aren't entitled to national minimum wage, we thought that this might be a way of trying to exclude directors. But the Treasury have come back to HMRC, to ICAEW, and said they are not excluded from the scheme. And you've got to do your best efforts from their diaries, their notes of meetings, etc., to come up with what you can defend as what their normal hours would be, and therefore what are they working to keep their business going from July. So we're not going to get, I don't think, any more clarity than that. They are in the scheme. You've got to come up with a view. It doesn't matter for national minimum wage because directors don't have to be included for national minimum wage. So that's at least something. Okay, next slide, please. Hey. So let's look at a person. Somebody who's been furloughed since April, working 37.5 hours a week, and this was their base February salary. Coming back to work in early July, and they are going to be working 82.5 hours in July. Don't put your claims in too soon before you definitely know what somebody's working, as you're going to have a right mess trying to adjust. So the later you can leave it, when you've got certainty, because people are going to have a lot of changes, aren't they? You know, is the business doing as well? Do we need more people, less people? Are we going to lock down again? So we don't need people at work. So let's have a look at the claim figures for this particular person, if we can, Haig. So for this particular individual, we've already worked out that their usual hours are a 167. We know they're working 82.5. That gives us 84.5 furlough hours. So we then have to proportion to the amount of furloughed hours out of the usual hours to work out what they're entitled to be paid. And that's why we've got to do that bit first and work out the usual hours, because the revenue can't do that. That's for us to tell them, so they can then work out the furloughed proportion. So we then divide that base February salary by the number of hours, 167, and multiply by the number of furloughed hours in months. That gives us a value of 114,840. We compare that to how much we could claim for the maximum, and it's not the maximum, so that's good. So we can do 80% of that, and that gives us 918.72. We've had this very strange calculation through Scheme 1, and it carries on in Scheme 2, that we knock the pence off the furlough pay to work the NICs out, and the NICs is proportioned, and so is the pension in the same way. So we take the employer NICs threshold, and we proportion that to the number of usual hours times the furloughed hours. That gives us our reduced NICs threshold, and that therefore gives us the NICs claim for the person. And we won't be doing this after July, of course, because that's the last month for claiming any on costs anyway. And the same for the pension. We proportion the pension threshold to the usual hours and furloughed hours. That gives us a new pension threshold, and that also gives us then the amount of pension that we can reclaim. So that's the nuts and bolts of a standard monthly paid full month claim. Okay, Haig, next one, please. Now let's have a look at a variable paid employee. Because we've now got a situation of having to work out usual hours as well as pay, this becomes a more complex calculation, joy of joys. So the first stage for a variable hours employee is to work out the best outcome in terms of hours for them. So the best outcome carries on using what we've been doing in Scheme 1, which is the average usual hours over 2019-20 better for them, or the usual hours in the corresponding pay period for last year? So this particular example, the person worked 62 hours last July, but their total hours across 2019-20 was a combination of some worked hours and some holiday hours, which have to be included, divided by 366 days. That gives us a daily amount by calendar day to work out the average for a 31-day month. So the average for that 31-day month rounds up to 78 hours. That's better than July, so 78 becomes the usual hours that we use for this person. The second step is that having worked out the usual hours, therefore we know what the furloughed hours are, because this person was going to work 60 hours in July, we then do the best pay outcome, which is what we've also been doing in Scheme 1, where we look at the average over 19-20 and work that back to an average 31-day month, and we compare that to how much they earned in July 2019. And again, that gives us the proportion for their furloughed hours of what's the best outcome in this particular situation. The average is the best outcome for them. So that becomes the furlough pay as the starting point for them, which we would then deal with on the 80% basis. So you can see there's a two-step calculation there. Hours first, best outcome for hours. Second step, best pay outcome. And then you can move forward with a variable pay person as well. Okay, next one, please, Haig. So the next thing I just wanted to mention to you is the concept of what are called orphans. So orphans are the little bits of the ends of months and the starts of months that you can't claim for straightforwardly, because we didn't have this in Scheme 1, but in Scheme 2, your minimum claim period is 7 days. Now that doesn't work, of course, for weeklies, because there will always be odd days at the start and end of a month, because our claims have to be contained within a calendar month now. So it's quite okay for you to have odd days at the start or end of a month that are less than 7 days, as long as there's another claim that's going to follow on from the end of your orphan or ended before the start of your orphan. So you can see on the slide that in a situation for July, you could have somebody who was weekly paid with an orphan period of 4 days at the start of the month, then 3 weekly claim periods, and then an orphan of 6 days at the end. And that's fine, because the orphans are preceded or followed by a full claim period of at least 7 days. Or in that scenario, you could have orphans at the start and end, and then a 21-day claim in the middle, because it's at least 7 days. So that's going to be great fun if you've got weeklies, 4 weeklies, mixed pay frequencies in a PAYE scheme. So it didn't apply in Scheme 1, it does in Scheme 2. Okay, next one, please. The next one is that I want to say, guys, that we are due some more guidance this week, which is lovely, isn't it? So we're only at Wednesday morning at the moment, and usually we get our guidance about 10 o'clock at night on Friday night. So please don't be planning to go to the pub at the end of this week, because that'll almost certainly be when we get, I think we're at probably iteration 17 of some of the sets of guidance now that we've had since March. So please enjoy the next couple of days. That's where we are at this moment in time. And of course, it won't be the end. But I'll now open up if anybody wants to ask questions, because I'm sure you probably do. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. I'm sure we're all experts now on that, because it's also simple anyway, Kate, as you said. So not, but we've got, I think, key points there for me were single directors. The rounding is obviously a big change.
Yeah.
That's come out, and I know a lot of firms that I've been speaking to have built models around the initial guidance. So a lot of extra work there.
Can I just make a point about that I've just had a very disappointing email about, shall we say. On the 5th of June, the software developers were given a specification for Scheme 2 with completely different rounding rules. They were not even the rounding rules that came out on the 12th of June. That specification was never withdrawn, and I've just had an email from HMRC saying that there was no need to withdraw it because it's got nothing to do with payroll software, which I've gone back and said, I'm not sure what you're talking about. You produced a specification because people have built modules within their software to assist their clients. So it just would have been useful to have gone back to them to say that that specification was null and void. So if you are a software developer, or if you have been given a module, do ask your software team what they based it on, because that guidance of the 5th of June is not the right guidance. It changed on the 12th and it changed again last week.
Thanks, Kate. I think it just explains I think there's so many component parts in phase 2 of furlough, so many people involved, that, as we said before we started the call, that we don't think any employer has got this 100% spot on from the outset, really. It's trying to take that pragmatic approach.
It is, and keep copies of everything. The guidance you relied on, the decisions that you made at that point in time, even down to the hour of the day almost, that you made a particular decision. Because in 6 years' time, when you're having a compliance visit, you may not be there. The person doing the visit from HMRC has probably just left university and started doing compliance work and won't even remember what furloughing was. So we absolutely need to have all our evidence to defend this reputationally and financially in the future.
Perfect. And from your perspective on the professional bodies that you're part of, are they tailoring anything for guidance for chartered accountancy firms and providers to approach this, or?
Okay, so tomorrow, if anybody's listening who's an ICAEW member, I'm doing a webinar tomorrow for the tax faculty, where we're going to talk about risk and engagement letters and what ICAEW members might need to do with clients to make sure that everybody understands what the risks are and who is liable if things go wrong, etc., and identifying that. So I don't know about the other bodies because I'm only involved in ICAEW, but I can imagine the professional bodies will want to support their members, at least with, you know, best practice guidance about managing the risk for a very long time.
Perfect. No, that's great. And I think for those members in Scotland and Northern Ireland, I have seen the equivalent happening. I don't think as quickly as yourself, Kate, but I do know there's some conversations just now happening to support. So I think big thank you from us. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask Kate? If you do, feel free to unmute and ask away.
Or just use the raise hand function as well, so we can try to coordinate if there is any questions.
Is everyone now an expert on flexible?
That works for me. I'm glad
if there are questions afterwards, because if anyone's like me, I always think of a question after, just feel free to reach out to us on the group, on the LinkedIn group, or to send an email over to the Payroll Bureau Association at gmail.com, and we'll be able to forward those questions on or get some of them answered for you.
I think it's only as you start to look at particular scenarios with clients that you begin to realise the questions you have. And particularly if you are in the bureau setup, of course, this makes life much more difficult for you, because whilst you would have been cognizant of the pay in Scheme 1, you aren't necessarily aware of people's hours, because you haven't, particularly for salaried people, it's never been relevant to you. So again, you've got that difficult decision about, can you actually support claims in Scheme 2 without an awful lot of input from the client to give you the hours, or are you just going to step away from the claims for Scheme 2 and say, well, we just can't do this because we don't have the data in the first place to do it?
We do actually have a couple of questions now.
Okay.
So Alison, you've raised your hand. I shall unmute you now. You may have a request. Here we go.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Not necessarily. Hi there, everybody. Not necessarily a question on calculating the furlough bit, but to pay for a salaried person for the actual hours that they worked when they came back, would you pay them based on their hourly rate, or would you pay them on the proportion of the days that they were furloughed against their monthly salary?
Absolutely. Their pay is based on their terms and conditions. You've got to think that the furlough pay is just you giving them a government grant, and it's not related to their terms and conditions, other than you've got to give them 80% of what appropriately has been calculated. But when they're working, they must be paid their hourly rate for the hours that they work. And that's particularly important with national minimum wage, of course, because we've not had to worry about this, and now we have got to worry about national minimum wage.
Okay, thank you.
It's all right.
I have another question. Jodie, so I'll just unmute you now. You may get a request to do so.
Yeah. Hello, do you hear me?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so if the people are still fully furloughed and they are on weekly payroll, are they still, the calculations are the same?
No, Jalita, if they're fully furloughed, you're in a lovely position, because if you're fully furloughed, you don't have to do any hours. You just carry on doing what you were doing under Scheme 1. So the more that you can keep claim periods where they're not working at all, that's great. And I would suggest then only when they start working, you start the claim period ideally when they probably start to do some flexible work if you're doing weekly pay, because then you've got nice, tidy, I'm going to worry about hours for that particular claim period. On the uploading, for those of you putting claims in for over 100, the upload template has got new fields in it for usual, actual and furloughed hours. But you can ignore those fields for people who are not working. So you don't have to complete them. So you can have a mixed claim for people who are flexibly furloughed in July and those who are fully furloughed, like Lita saying, who are not, who don't need any hours at all, because we're working them out the same way as we did Scheme 1.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
do have 2 more, Kate, if you've got time.
Awesome.
Lisa, I'm just going to come to you. You didn't raise your hand, but message me directly. So bear me a minute whilst I try and find you. You should now be unmuted, hopefully. Yeah.
Hi.
Away.
Thank you. We have an employee who is currently being furloughed, but she's just had a baby. Now, she isn't entitled to maternity pay because she hasn't worked at the company long enough. Now, normally anyone going on maternity leave that isn't entitled to it, I'd fill out an SMP1 form and she would claim it direct. Or do I keep her on furlough? I'm not sure what to do. Oh,
I think Kate's on mute. Kate, can we unmute Kate?
Give me a moment.
Yeah, you give her an SMP1 as normal, Lisa. She gets maternity allowance from DWP. She's not your problem.
okay. God.
I wish they were all going to do that.
Thanks.
Chloe, I'm just going to come to you now as well. Give me a moment. You should now be unmuted. Far away.
Right, thank you. Just a quick question,
Hello,
Kate.
fellow East Midlands person who's not in lockdown.
Yeah, I'm in Nottingham, so we're okay at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah, just in terms of holiday pay, the top up, is the approach similar from the original scheme? So as an example, there's somebody who is returning to work 3 hours a day, normally working 8 hours a day. In terms of the top up, I've just done an hourly rate equivalent of their normal full paid hourly rate and worked out the difference of what the furlough hours are and pay the difference. Would that be the best approach?
Absolutely, yeah. As long as you've done it back, Chloe, over the 52-week average, which is what we've got, discounting any furlough weeks, because that would have reduced it, which would be unfair. Then that exactly, work out what their average rate is and just pay the difference.
Yeah, I mean, in this example, it's somebody who's got fixed hours.
Right.
And just one other thing, I think you've just mentioned it, in terms of if you've got one client, but they've got a mixture of someone who's on full furlough and then other people who are on flexible furlough. I know they're all technically flexible, but for those that are on the original fully furloughed provision, we don't need to record hours if we're recording hours for others.
That's right. What you perhaps might need to bear in mind, Chloe, is if the client then later in the month wanted to bring them back, you'd need the hours from the beginning of the month. So you might want to start saying you need to start recording hours in case you have to make some different decisions and bring people off furlough, because people might have to make very last minute decisions to move people in and out. But if they're fully furloughed, even they're in a mixed claim, you don't need hours for them if their start and end is a full furlough claim.
Brilliant, thank you.
It's all right.
Thank you, Chloe. I think that's all the questions we had. I'm going to pass you back to Michael. Thank you so much, Kate, for answering the questions and the presentation.
Lovely to be invited. Thank
you. Above my head, but I'm sure everyone else will make use of it. I'll share my screen back with everybody.
Thanks, Haig.
See what's coming next.
Cheers, Haig. So I think just to reiterate there, Haig's comments, a huge thank you from not only the PBA, Kate, but I think the payroll sector. I don't know if you get enough thank yous, but I think for all the support that you have.
We're all in this together, so it's really good to have met so many new professionals over the last few months. So thanks for listening, guys, and good luck.
Thank you. We do appreciate it. And just on some of the questions there, for the template, we'll make sure the template is shared with PBA members for the new scheme for the upload for over 100. And lastly, to let you know about our next webinar, which is on the 6th of August on the Payroll Apprenticeship Scheme. And we're delighted to have both Ian Holloway and Nick Phillips, both industry experts, very, very busy people, but they have agreed to take some time out to speak with PBA members. So that is on the 6th of August and that'll be coming out soon on our LinkedIn page for you to sign up. So I do hope you make some time to join there and hopefully make use of this scheme, which has been a long time in the making and coming to fruition, which is great. And then lastly for me, conscious parts of the UK are now coming out of lockdown and getting back to normal. So I hope everyone is safe, keeping busy, as I'm sure you are, and have a great day from all of us at the PBA. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye now. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.